The Short Game is listener-supported on Patreon. If you'd like to support the show and join us on our Discord, head to theshortgame.net or patreon.com/theshortgame.
Welcome back to The Short Game. This is a show about short video games that respect your time. I'm Raygan Kelly, and I am joined this week by all of my awesome co-hosts.
Comrade Nate Heininger.
Comrade Laura Nash.
The Beast, Shane Kelly.
And this week we are talking about Animal Farm: New Horizons.
A game with no reference to comrades, actually.
No, it's true. This is a game with many, I don't know if you go with references. This is probably the closest to a pure book adaptation that we've ever covered. We're a book club style podcast, but this is the closest we've ever come to a book club episode on one of the great classics of literature.
Yes, this is an adaptation of Animal Farm, and it's for iOS and Mac PC. And before we get into it, there's two reasons we wanted to cover this, and one is Nerial, who did Reigns, and the other one is Emily Short, who did the writing. So, interested on both those fronts. But before we get into the game, I'm curious, what was your guys' relationship to Animal Farm and George Orwell and this? If you guys haven't figured it out, it's a book.
Yeah, this is super strange.
It is.
Animal Farm is a so if for some reason you're coming to this without familiarity with Animal Farm, which is entirely possible, it's not taught.
No judgment.
Yeah, no judgment. It's not taught in every school in America, and you may be outside of America where this book is. You know, I believe it's still like popular in the UK, but I have no idea whether this book is like a touch point globally. I really have no idea. But Animal Farm is one of those books that, at least in where I grew up, gets taught a lot in the elementary, middle school kind of zone in school. If you're not familiar, it is a kind of a fairy tale retelling or allegory. It's by George Orwell, author of 1984 and many other things that people are probably less familiar with than 1984. And it's a retelling of the story of the Russian Revolution and the rise to power of Stalin and Trotsky and that sort of whole saga. But it's told as an allegory of sort of a farm, where the farm is there's an evil, cruel farmer who abuses all of the animals on the farm. The animals rise up, take down their oppressive farmer, band together under the banner of animalism, a new ideology of animal kind, and their grand experiment slowly falls apart through a bunch of predictable and unpredictable circumstances. It's a really weird book, and it's, I think, kind of badly taught, at least where I grew up. Like, what was you guys' experience with this book growing up?
So even if you've never read the book, you've probably heard either this phrase or something like it, where there's the animals establish a law that is, all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. And if you've never read the book, like, that gives you, I think, a good general tone of what this book is doing and what story it's telling.
Yeah, there's 7 commandments that all the animals agree on at the beginning, and by the end of the book, there's just one, and that is the only commandment. So,
yeah,
my experience was at the same school as Raygan and Shane, where we all were forced to read at middle school, and it's a bit of a weird experience because you don't know anything about the rise of Stalinism. You don't know who Trotsky is when you start reading the book. So I remember the first thing the teacher had to do was like, snowball equals, like, just write down each of the pigs' names and who they were.
Yeah.
And then we were like, well, those names don't mean anything. So then she had to explain the history of the Russian Revolution. And he wrote the book in 1945. So it's not like there wasn't that many years of Russian Revolution to cover. We just don't ever cover anything until the Cold War. So it was like they tried to stick Animal Farm in the curriculum in English to teach us about allegory, but then they had to teach us about history instead, the whole class. And there was one kid who was like a communist baby and who kept being like, this would all be fine if everyone just listened to Snowball. Like my parents, when they left, like my grandparents who like left because they were Trotskyists. And we were like, wait, you're the only person in the entire class who understands what this book is about. And you're mad the whole time.
That's pretty wild.
I wish I had that kid in my class, because in my class, nobody understood what the book was about. And I'm pretty confident our English teacher was a libertarian who took the view that this book is... So this is all sort of brought back to me because when I first went to go download this game, I went to the iOS App Store, and there's only a couple of reviews, and the first one is a review for somebody who left a fairly negative review for, I think, technical reasons, but said that they were glad this game was made to teach a younger generation about the dangers of socialism. And I was
the
like,
evils of socialism.
Right,
I think
the
it
evils
says.
of socialism. And I had to think for a minute about that. I was like, what is this talking about? I'm confused. And it's not so much that like I have like a super great understanding of all of the politics here. You'll have to forgive me because I'm not an expert in the Russian Revolution or anything like that. But it immediately sent me back to middle school, where I think that's basically the view that the Texas education system has of this book, is that like, you know, this book is there, at least when I was a kid. This book was taught along with things like Ayn Rand, specifically Anthem is a book I kind of remember being in this same sort of vibe. Or there's a short story called Harrison Bergeron by
yes, Harrison Bergeron, yeah,
by Kurt Vonnegut. And these get really celebrated by a certain sort of stripe of anti-communist, but also sort of just generally anti-socialist and maybe even anti-left sort of libertarian style people. And those people are at least fairly well represented in teaching in Texas. So the way this book was taught to me was like, this is why communism is a failure from the get-go. This book is a dramatization of the inherent failures of anything that isn't total free market capitalism, and that only unrestrained free market capitalism will ever triumph. Everything else is communism and is doomed to fail, just as this Animal Farm was doomed to fail, right? And that was the lens through which I viewed this book for many years. Like, this book was about absolute failure of the ideology that of all of that ideology, and then
of animalism specifically.
Of animalism, it's a complete indictment of animalism. And I don't know. It's funny looking back on it because I have a very different view of things like that now. My politics are, I mean, you know, not the politics of a Texan middle schooler now, but like looking back on it, I have a very different vibe from this book. And I think that's supported by the fact that like George Orwell was a socialist. He was mourning the betrayal of the revolution. He wasn't mourning the betrayal of free market capitalism. Like, that's not what this book was about. Anyway, that's sort of where I came back to. Playing this game like really made me flash back to how I perceived this book when I was, I don't know how old, middle school aged. And it was a really interesting experience kind of going back to it and thinking about it from a different perspective.
I frankly don't remember my education around this book. I know in high school I went through a brief Orwell phase and read like 1984 twice and read Animal Farm like 3 times and was really, really into it. But I'm just going to assume that if I was educated on it, rural Missouri is probably not that much different than rural Texas as far as their perspective on things like this.
Yeah, and I do have to thank that one kid for being very insistent and correcting everybody every time they said this book is an indictment against socialism. He would say communism.
Communism.
Right.
It is,
Communism.
I mean, there is
because there's a huge difference. And he was completely accurate. But like when the teacher misspoke, when kids in the class misspoke, he'd be like, no, this is an indictment of communism, specifically Stalinism.
How easy it is to corrupt communism, right?
And how hard it is when this game makes you be all the other animals who have no power.
Right.
Yeah.
So should we move on to talking about the game in particular rather than just the book?
I think we should say first, this whole episode, I guess, is a spoiler for Animal Farm and thus a spoiler for this game, right?
And by proxy, a spoiler for the Russian Revolution.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. If you're really, if you haven't if you still have that TiVoed and you haven't played it back, we're gonna be spoiling what happens to Trotsky. So,
And my sweet, sweet boxer. Oh.
Oh, that one, that hurt. I was like, I really tried. So the thing I was doing when I was playing this game is the things I remembered and was still mad at 20 years later about Animal Farm. I was trying not to have those things happen, and they did anyway. So I think
it's
this
like,
is
no, I can be better. I can run a communist nation.
well, I was
Everyone
like,
else
I can
has done
resist
it wrong,
communism
but-
from the ground up. No, you can't. That's the point of the game and the book. So that is the spoiler for my enjoyment of the game. But real quick, to take a step back, if you're asking yourself, how do you make Animal Farm game? The answer is they turn it into an interactive storybook, which I used to make for my job. So they use all the tropes. They have beautiful handmade stuff. They have voiceover. They have
really good voiceover. Really good.
great voiceover. And they've got this style where you can kind of tap and drag over different parts of the story to find out what you do next. This is all stuff that's incredibly common in actual games for kids, which I think ties right into that fairy tale Animal Farm. But then the decisions you're making are like, who gets murdered?
Yeah, I mean, it's another way to think of it. If you have, I thought of a lot of our interactive fiction coverage, right? And it's essentially a choose your own adventure game with a wonderful UI. Like it's like a Twine game with a really wonderful UI.
While we're discussing the UI, there was one challenge that I kind of ran into with the UI, which Laura, you mentioned the UI is a lot of a tap and drag kind of interface, which actually works quite well. I would say the majority of your time is spent with a kind of bird's eye view of the farm, and you'll see the various different animals appearing there. And some kind of event will be taking place. That will be something like maybe the sheep are saying something, I don't know, they say something must be done about X, Y, or Z. And then you can mouse around over the various different animals that might be present in the scene. Visually, this interface is really nice because it shows the farm and the current state of the farm, like how close to complete is the windmill? Is it summer or winter? All of that stuff's very beautiful and visual. And then you can mouse over the different animals with sort of a finger-pointing magnifying glass. And then it'll show you some of the animals with their little portrait, and you can tap on them, and it'll also show a verb. But one of the kind of odd things about this game is you're not embodying any particular animal. The structure here is somewhat confused in terms of what is going to happen when you choose a particular verb. There's certain considerations with, like, if I have put my finger over the cow, and the verb that's displayed is the word suffer, who is doing the suffering? Is the cow the object or the subject of that suffering?
Wow, I never had the choice for the cow to suffer. I want to know what happened in your game.
Yeah, it is interesting though, Shane. I had a similar experience. Basically, they set up like a question, and sometimes you are acting on behalf of, like, it'll be like, okay, the cows wake up early and they're ready to work, and then you get to mouse over like all the different animals, and sometimes you are choosing like, what are the cows going to do that day? Are they going to interact with the hens? Are they going to interact with the goats? And then other times you're just like an omniscient, overlord who's deciding just what like is the next action the farm is going to take. And it was that same confusion that led to me selecting the death of Boxer. And I felt so bad and stupid when I like chose the the outcome I chose was to trick Boxer and the community into think he was going to a vet, but instead he was going to the knacker to be killed. And I was like, that is the opposite of what I was trying to do. However, maybe that was intentional. You know, I as a player and a participant in communism meant to do one thing, and it had a completely alternate impact and ended in the death of like our one good person, you know?
That's
I
very Reigns. I mean,
yeah, you know, I think you're like, because this game makes you want to think it's a fun resource management game. Oh, I'll make my hens happy, and that'll cost me some animalism points, but it'll give me food. And so it masquerades as like as like a Farmville thing, but then your decisions end up in a revolution and, you know, bloodshed and all these different things that is really interesting and often was not what I was hoping or intending to happen.
Yeah, I think that's really true, because the thing that I went into this game thinking was like, okay, this is underneath the narrative. I thought this was going to be a farming simulator on some level.
Yeah,
like,
same.
I thought it was going to be much more it's not that it's not systems driven. It's just that the systems aren't really about the farm exactly. Like it's
there are systems about the farm.
Sure. I don't mean
there
to get.
are,
yeah, I don't mean to.
But
yeah.
the outcomes are not clear.
Can I stick with this for a second, because I absolutely have to stop and imagine the game that Raygan and I clearly were imagining, and I just want to discuss that game for a second.
The hypothetical
because
game.
if there were a hypothetical Stardew Valley where in maybe year 2 all the humans were killed by the pigs and the chickens took over, like, can you imagine the fun that you might have with a game like that? Personally, I would love. I wasn't necessarily expecting a farming sim in this game, but when I heard they were doing an Animal Farm video game adaptation, that's immediately where my mind went, and I was kind of hoping for that.
Imagine like I was really into Zoo Tycoon way back, and it's like there was an outcome in Zoo Tycoon where, you know, like a fence could break or something, and a bear would get out and rampage, or a cheetah would get out. Mm-hmm. It's like I was imagining a game where like that could happen, but after the bear gets out and kills like 5 civilians, it becomes like elected president of the zoo and actually gets to go around and just eat whatever it wants. Not quite in this game. So I originally was annoyed, or not really annoyed, but like I was not happy with how the game was playing, because the things that I wanted to do and what I thought I was doing was interacting with these systems, and the outcomes that I was hoping for were not happening. And I thought it was obtuse and unclear, but the more I got into it, I think that is the point.
Yeah.
And I think you are like, that is what this game is trying to say, is like,
now that is, Nate, also that is exactly what I have come to expect from Nerial games.
Yeah.
Because across all of the Reigns versions that I've played, including their recent Space Reigns, the choices and the action, the choice that you make often really doesn't feel like it has a direct impact. Sometimes feels like it has a logical reason for impacting the various meters that you're managing, but often doesn't. One thing I'll say for this game is that it's a lot cuter to look at than those games, but it also makes the kind of under the hood, it feels like the meter kind of thing is still working the same way it does in the other Nerial games. Like here, rather than having 4 meters at the top of the screen, you have a number of sheep that are sitting and looking and reading the laws. You have the condition of the roof on the various buildings. You have the piles, rise and fall of the piles of grain in the shed. And I don't know if I'm missing any others. I guess there's the windmill, but fences and windmills. Yeah. And some of those are all mechanically treated very similar. And in fact, in some circumstances, when you mouse over a choice, you see the impact that it's going to have. So, for example, I did take a screenshot when I chose to suffer for the cow, because it was just such an evocative verb. By the way, Laura, you asked earlier what was the choice. There was a scenario in year 4 where one of the cows needed its calf to be turned. I don't know how much you know about
birthing,
farms.
Like it was having...
I know, yeah, I was having birthing problems, and the cows were saying, if Jones was here, he would come and turn the calf. And I think you had a choice. You had 2 choices. You could select, bad pig, snowflake.
Snowball.
Nope.
Shoot,
Napoleon.
No, bad pig.
Squealer.
Napoleon.
Or Squealer, yeah.
Yeah.
It
I mean,
was,
is
in
there
this case,
really
it
a
was
good
Napoleon.
pig? Let's be clear.
Napoleon's verb was refuse help, and the cow's verb was suffer. But Napoleon's circle was shown with a green upward arrow, and suffer was a red downward arrow. Now, that does indicate this is going to raise or lower something, but it's also wasn't visually clear here what was going to be raised or lowered. I think it was animalism. So it was interesting. That was a tough choice.
Yeah, I think there are some random events from the book, and I think there are some must-have events. I was trying very hard not to overwork Boxer, the wonderful horse, because I remember being very upset when he went to the glue factory. And I was like, if I just don't wear him out, this will be fine. But eventually he's like, I'm getting old, because it's like you're 5 or 6, and he's like, I'm getting old. I hope I have a good retirement. And then in my scenario, Napoleon swooped in and put him in a car, and all the animals chased after it, yelling, "It's a trick! It's a trick! Get him off!" And he still goes.
Here's your gold watch, buddy.
Yeah,
but the gates are locked. And
it's also tricky because he does the best work. Like for collecting hay. So if you need the most amount of hay, use your buddy Boxer.
He'll do 2x. Yeah,
Yep.
He'll feed everybody.
I think every animal has. There's probably more going on, but I think the animals have like health and morale. Or I think are their 2 like underlying metrics.
I did figure out at the end of my like year 7 game that you could open up the handbook, and look at the animals, and if they are in a bad place, they have a little circle that's bleeding around them.
Oh, I didn't notice that.
And then you can see the dead skeleton of the dead animals.
Yeah, I definitely saw this.
This is one of my favorite things, because this bit of UI is just oblique enough that it is interesting, but it's also very visual and fun. Like there are some of the animals in mine. I took a screenshot at a certain point, and just as you said, Laura, some of them are kind of on a green background versus a red background, and I think that is indicating their current state of mind. You can also see it on their dejected faces. Some of them have been scratched out in red pen, and some of them are skeletons. And I think the ones that were scratched out in red pen are the ones who have run away, as though they have been kind of erased from the book.
Or exiled. I had someone scratched out in red pen who had been kicked out of the farm.
Yeah.
But to discuss the book UI itself, I think is a worthy point of discussion here, because the first thing you have is the endings, which they call destinies. And I think there are 6 of these.
No, they're not even. It's a little confusing. I think there's like destinies are just high level situations that the game can be in. So there's things like surveillance, songless, revisionist, things like that, where you've sort of created a world that is of that. So like surveillance, that's the one that I ended up with on my first playthrough, which is the birds are spying on everyone, and it's a major part of the game is what the birds are doing. So my game had a lot of bird talk and like the birds telling everyone what they were seeing and what they weren't seeing. And that goes away. And then there's like what almost felt like achievements that you get for different outcomes that get stamped in this book and maintained throughout your game.
Yeah, the achievements, I mean, the look of this is also really nice. It looks like a passport, but with stamps that are things like a birthday cake for having survived 1 year, or the flag for Happy Farm, but also things like the death of Snowball, etc. So, I mean, that's all very fun. And then there's also a page on the humans of the world, which is pretty sparse. There's not very many human characters in the story.
Yeah, I think it's nice to have a secondary gauge of what you've done and what you haven't, especially in a game with replayability. This is probably one of the nicest looking ones because each of the achievements, you can also tap into it even before you've gotten it, unless it's secret, to find out what exactly Happy Farm means. It means you reached maximum animalism. I think the way they introduce the handbook is fun because you are trashing the house and then you look on the shelf and you pull this handbook out. So it actually even feels a little bit more organic than like, press this button and you can see the UI. They made a concentrated effort to make it feel part of the world.
Yeah, I like that.
So I want to hear more about what happened in your guys' games because it's funny how this game made me feel like I had almost no control over the narrative at times.
Yeah.
But somehow I had a completely different narrative and outcome than you guys did. So I know there's 8 endings. I believe the main playthrough I did, I lasted all 7 years and got the true ending in that it's the ending from the book. I don't think there is a true way to play this, but I did get the one that is the same as the last page of the novel. I tried so hard to just destroy that windmill and just never build it. And I kept not building the windmill, which is probably how I got to 7 years, is I just kept refusing to build the windmill. But at the same time, like, animalism won. Like, the pigs won. The pigs moved into the house. The pigs wore clothes. The pigs drank alcohol. Like, all the stuff I didn't want happened. Boxer died. I want to know how much control you guys felt you had in this game.
I had a very different story than yours. In mine, I think the guiding principle around most of my choices was I just disregarded Napoleon for almost the whole story. And so I had several things that were quite different from the novel. We did build the windmill. I was pro windmill. I think, they if they start milling their own.
I was pro windmill until Napoleon sicked the dogs on Snowball and he ran away. And then I was like, no windmill for you, Napoleon. So just to clarify, I was pro Snowball windmill.
Some of the kind of key points in my story were I did get the story track where Napoleon dies.
How did you do that?
That was interesting. So there was a battle. So he died in battle where the farmers tried to retake the manor farm. And I was just like, go to the front lines, a Snowball. Napoleon. And basically I tried to send all the pigs off to die in battle. And yeah, so he didn't make it home. So the best possible pig I at the time was Squealer. So I guess Squealer by default takes over there. And I will say something here that was a little odd about my game, which is this happened it felt pretty late in the story. I want to say it was like year 4 or 5. The death of Snowball did not stop him from having dialogue for quite some time. Sorry, the death of Napoleon. Sorry, I need to get my pigs in a row.
You sound just like we all did in middle school.
Right. Yeah. So exactly. Napoleon dies in battle, and then like immediately thereafter, like people are talking to him, which definitely was a bug. But so what I didn't get was what I really wanted to see, which would be like a lot of the animals reacting to the death of Napoleon, which is kind of a bummer. The long-term effect of that on the story, he did eventually stop talking. And the farm lasted a very long time. I made it into year 7, but by the time I got to year 7, I was getting like huge swaths of time where it would just like advance almost the entire year with no events, and then at the end. I had a few things. I think one thing's worth mentioning is some of the fun characters that show up. I don't know if anyone else had the goat or the camel.
Yeah.
Yes,
I had the
both of
goat.
them.
I never saw a camel. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, the camel was
Oh yeah, the camel was terrific. Both the goat and the camel were really instrumental in helping me keep the farm running because they were good at like bringing in the wheat or the hay or what have you. And the camel is probably my favorite addition to the story because he brings this terrific outsider perspective to the farm. But then right there at the end, we were just losing animals to starvation left and right. And the farm was completely depopulated. And once all the animals were dead, the humans came back.
Oh.
So Shane, I had the same outcome just a little bit earlier than you. So my game was mostly centered around the expansion of our farm. We annexed some nearby farms. We got a goose, a camel, a goat. We had all these other new people. I got the achievement of meeting everyone in the game, which was cool. However, everyone was dead by the end of year 4. So we all ran out of food. A lot of mouths to feed, and everyone was dead. So I had the same thing as you, Laura, with I was trying to build the windmill, and then what felt like out of nowhere, Napoleon chases Snowball out, and then we did end up building the windmill. The farmers came and blew it up, and then not that long after, everyone on my farm was dead, and the farmers came back.
You know, I had a pretty similar story to Nate's. I've played through the game once and then started again and haven't completed a second playthrough. I'm kind of halfway through, I think. But the first playthrough was a little unsatisfying, and I think this might be my main complaint about the game. I similar to Shane, I felt like that the choices were sometimes confusing, or their consequences were really unclear. And not just that their consequences were unclear, that sometimes the choices themselves were really unclear what I was choosing between. So I sort of felt estranged from the choices. I'd be presented with a couple of options, but it wasn't clear to me what the options actually meant. They just sort of hinted at what you were choosing. And that made me kind of feel like, well, I guess I'll just sort of go with my gut. And I went with my gut and ended up with a story that, from what I could tell, really closely mirrored the story of the novel right up to about year 4. And then everyone starved to death in the cold. And I didn't find that to be a particularly I really, if it were me, and I'm not Emily Short, I am not a like master level narrative designer, but like I don't like that ending being there, because like it just sort of felt like I didn't know what went wrong, and then the game ended early and I couldn't really tell why. And it's like, okay, maybe I should have been like managing my farm stats better, but the whole farm management system seemed like a little bit of a fake. You know what I mean? Like it didn't really feel like I was like managing like a sincere system. It felt like a narrative that had this, I don't know. I felt pretty frustrated with that playthrough. I didn't run into any bugs, but
can I bring something up related to what you're saying there, Raygan?
Yeah.
As far as like the choices that you make around managing the farm, I also kind of would agree that it doesn't feel like you're empowered to make those choices. So I took a screenshot of a particular moment in the game. It always was telling you like things like, okay, so it'll be the first time during the year where you can do some planting. Right. It hasn't presented me the choice to do planting yet. Or now, or any of the, typical farm work. But now it's already autumn and it's telling me, oh, it's beginning to get cold, but it's not too late to plant the wheat. So it's that kind of circumstance where it's like, it feels like that I would almost always prioritize like feed everyone highest, and yet they all still starved. So that's kind of strange.
Yeah, there were multiple going into the end of the year. The animals get together. And almost every year, my group was like, "How do we get in this situation?
Yeah.
I thought we had taken care of this." And as the player, I was like, "Me too, guys."
Yeah, dog.
I thought we had.
Yeah, the Hins are just gonna doubt again.
Yeah, I also thought that I was taking care of everyone. Again, I do think that's kind of intentional, but as a game, it is a little less satisfying when I think we're used to like more hard and fast resource management games. But I will repeat, I think this is what this game wants you to feel like. I think this game wants you to feel like I did everything right and everyone died of starvation, as an education about is what the book was trying to say, is how like communism
right, yeah.
is,
And there's no button to murder the pigs. There's no button to be like, this is bullshit. I will not listen to you pigs. And when the pigs take the peppies from the mom and they're like, it's for the good of the farm, I'd be like, no, there's no button to press. There's an article that was going around on Twitter. I'm like a week and a half behind on Twitter because it was bad for my health. But I did see last time I was on it an article. It was from Scientific American of all places about why people hated the last season of Game of Thrones. Stick with me. It said that it switched from being a sociological TV show like The Wire that was all about systems, and it went to a psychological one that was about individual people's choices. That is something that has stuck with me, and I kept thinking about that in this game because there is no psychological in this game. It is all sociological. It is all systems, and it's actually really frustrating because you can't be like, hey, like I kept having Clover help out people because she seemed like the other horse that knew what she was doing and was helpful. And I really identify with Clover, and there are characters, but like you're not really in their heads and you can't really make them do something that they aren't smart enough to do. And, actually I found it very frustrating, but I kind of admire it because so many games let you be smarter than the character. Like almost every game lets you be stronger, smarter, wittier than the character should be. And this game's like, no, it's a sheep. Like,
yeah, that's an excellent point, Laura. There's a version of this game that could have been written where you can get in there and just say, I'm going to have the sheep learn to read.
Yeah.
But, that's not this story. I think it actually really is in that way. And I think a lot of the things we're talking about here, it's incredibly true to the novel. And the fact that you, Laura, wound up with exactly the ending for the novel, but the fact that, you're finding so many of these like terrific elements of the novel in this game. It works. It still works really well as a story. There's a reason that this story is such a classic, and having this cool presentation of it is I'm always a little bit critical of games because that's why I enjoy getting on podcasts and being critical of games. But this is a game that has been incredibly well adapted. I think I said up front, like I can't think of another video game that is as close of an adaptation as this is of a book.
I think that's really true, and I think it's something that clearly is something that they really were thinking a lot about. I saw an interview with the developers, and I think also with Emily Short, might have been the one on the escapist.com, where they were talking about their approach to this always sort of being one of like, well, what would Orwell have done, or what would Orwell have thought about this? And that really kind of comes through. They worked with the Orwell estate, and so they're like officially licensed in some way. And you can really see that they're like trying to be as true to Orwell's intent as possible. And in some ways, sort of for better or for worse, like I think it would be interesting to see a take on Animal Farm that tried to maybe extend it more or update it for like modern political situations, or who knows what else. But like this was this is almost exclusively interested in telling Orwell's story in a new way, rather than trying to like extend these ideas to other other political ideas or something like that.
Because even when the events are different from the book, they happen at different times, different things happen altogether, like different people die. Like it still feels like all the systems are in place, and that like moral decay, corruptness of the few ruling over the many will happen in your game no matter what.
Yeah, there's no ending in this where it's like, actually communism's good if you do these things correctly. Like it's not going to let you tell a different story than Orwell would have told.
There's no way I could see that you can keep socialism.
Right.
The game won't let you keep socialism.
Right. In the ending of my game, something I forgot to mention that I actually thought was a really excellent moment was as things were really getting bad and there were so few animals that we just needed to bring in a little bit of grain. And, you know, it was Squealer was the last pig standing. Finally, Squealer, you have an option to send him out and have him start pulling in the grain.
Oh.
And
I made
just
him plow
having him
every time.
having him out there plowing at the very last, you know, as things were going down, you know, the writing was on the wall. That I thought that was an effective little. Yeah. That was one of my favorite clicks in this game.
I'll say too, you know, Raygan, I think you're right. Like this could have. There's like, you know, Animal Farm 2 is like a thing that could happen. But I'm also glad that they didn't actually try to make anything like an allegory to modern times, because I do kind of feel like a lot of media right now is doing that. Like you can't watch a show right now without it kind of directly looking into the camera and saying, it's the alt-right, get it? You know, and then like, so I'm kind of okay with this game not doing that.
Yeah, I see that.
There was an interview I read that I had a quote from Emily Short where she said she'd explicitly considered covering like the Cold War and said like, we put that aside and didn't have like the Cold War plot line if you get into year like 8 or whatever, because that wasn't Orwell's story.
Yeah.
I'm very judgmental of educational games because almost all of them are bad. It is very rare that an educational game is made by really good game designers.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something I was going to bring up, because like this feels like something that you could absolutely like it's probably part of their business model on this game is like this has got to be deployed to schools, right?
I guarantee that's why it's available. I mean, Nerial is iOS, but like iOS is so like iPads are so common in classrooms. I'm sure they've got like educational deals to get this out.
Yeah. And it's called Orwell's Animal Farm, right? Like it is a direct tie-in to the book. And I think it would absolutely be an interesting experience for like a group of, you know, kids or high school students or whatever. Everyone go play this game and let's talk about like your story and what worked and what didn't work.
I will say I hope they patch the bugs that are in the game, because they're not visual bugs. They are like almost emotional ones. Like Muriel the goat died, and there's a great piece of like Muriel's from the other farm, and she had actually been teaching the animals how to read. So when she died in like year 5, they tell Napoleon and they tell Squealer, I think, that Muriel has died, and he's like, Muriel, is that one of the hens? It's like, no, it's the goat who's been teaching all of us how to read. And he's like, oh, she wasn't an original comrade, doesn't matter. That's incredibly powerful. Unfortunately, she also died in year 6 and year 7.
Oh no.
Muriel kept dying, and I was like, no. So again, like I think like bugs are more salient in a game like this, so I hope they patch it. I'm sure it won't be I hope it's already gone by the time you guys play it, but like it's in an interactive fiction game. I don't think I realized how much worse bugs are in a narrative.
Yeah.
Yeah, a lot hinges on who lives and who dies in this story, and that is weird that like the real standout bugs for both you and I were about animals that had died who continued to play.
I mean, of course, if you have that wrong, it's going to be incredibly glaring.
That's a glaring.
Well, I mean, she wasn't around for like she was gone on the map. She was dead in the book.
She shows
the event of her death popped up again. Yeah, it was pretty blatant with Napoleon,
which is surprising that you both I don't know too much about like what it takes to launch a game, but it is surprising that 2 of the 4 of us had that same thing where a comrade dies and then is referenced alive multiple times or dying again.
And both in late game, it sounds like.
Yeah. So I have to imagine, this is probably happening for a lot of players.
Well, I don't know. It's you have to be around for a long time. My stuff didn't start cropping up till 6 or 7. So I think like maybe it's just for late game players and they didn't catch it. So
well, we haven't talked about it yet. How long did it take you all to get to late game? I can't imagine anyone has bought this game and doesn't get to late game. You know, like of course my game ended at year 4, but I think I played for an hour before I got to year 4. So I think a run of this game is 1 to 2 hours at the most.
I contacted Emily Short on Twitter and she said 90 to 120.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. So I think this is a really interesting game in a few ways. I think it's interesting to see a novel, an important novel, directly adapted in a way that like puts a lot of emphasis on systems while still trying to tell a variation on the same narrative that hits the same themes and has the same sort of message. It's a really interesting challenge. And they did a really, I think, interesting and good job with it here. And I think, I would probably really encourage that high school student studying Animal Farm to play this game or what have you.
I think you're going to understand it a lot more than I did.
Yeah.
When I read it.
Yeah. For sure. It just seems like a really good way. For me, it was a good way to like re-examine like what did I think of Animal Farm when I read it in middle school and what do I think of it now? And that was really interesting and kind of useful to me. And I could see that being really great in an educational context. And if you haven't read Animal Farm since high school or middle school, like I had, I think this is a really interesting way to sort of revisit its ideas. It doesn't necessarily quite feel like of the moment, like this is the story that you have to read right now because it sheds light on, whatever. It's not exactly that, but it's still a really important story that has, it's a touch point in so many ways that I think it's really cool to see this adapted like this.
I've been trying to think of other books that this would be good for. Does anyone have any thoughts on like what's the next? I think we all like this. So what's the next book that Emily Short and the crew should turn into an interactive game? Cut if we can't come up with anything. We can take this out of the episode.
Classic book?
Sure, any book.
I mean, honestly, I think any of the works of Charles Dickens would make delightful. There's just like 30,000 characters, and there's so much chance and luck in those games that I feel like an RNG, like you could, especially if you made like you were just in London of Oliver. I feel like you could just like be in 1800s London and have all the different characters depending on your playthrough show up, like a Charles Dickens multiverse.
I would love a Bleak House legal drama adventure game, like just
Phoenix Wright Bleak House.
Systematize the ludicrous legal drama in Bleak House.
Objection.
And I would love that. By the way, that's a great book. Everyone should read it.
I mean, the Pride and Prejudice book's already a board game of just like...
Oh, yeah. Pride and Prejudice you could totally do.
It already is a board game.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of ones that have
the good news is we don't need to nominate Around the World in 80 Days.
I'm trying to think of like books that have like this sort of level of like political allegory or other stuff like that that you could systematize.
How about Jurassic Park? Life Finds a Way.
I think that is a Telltale game.
There's never been a Jurassic Park game. You're right.
Time travel story Slaughterhouse 5.
Not like this.
I think
true.
Not like this.
I think if you took Slaughterhouse 5 and did that, you'd have a really great excuse to like play around with jumping around in time and showing all these different scenes in whatever, you could really shuffle the order of scenes in that in creative ways, and there would be a lot of interesting things you could do with alternate timelines. So I would really like to see that.
Slaughterhouse 5 would be great.
Faulkner's The Sound and the Fury. I don't know what it would look like, but that
have
would be.
Have you read it? Ulysses. Also a book I haven't read.
Okay, go with me here. It's just a simulator of carrying infinite jest on the subway.
I bought
Anyone
that.
ask you about that, like, oh, how do you like him? Like, it's just too hard to describe. It's just really you deflecting any question about the book because you haven't actually read it yet. You just carry it around with you.
Yeah, I bought Infinite Jest for $1, and I was like, "That's the most pages per penny spent I think I could have done." And then I was like, "But I also wasted the $1 because I'm not reading this."
Well,
You're just accessorizing.
yeah, that's what it's for. It's for putting on the shelf behind you in Zoom calls. That's what that book is for, right?
Listeners, please write in and tell us why we should actually read Infinite Jest. That's clearly what this episode is about.
Yes. So I think we've got time to do a little what's making us happy this week. So Shane, what's making you happy this week?
Well, the thing that's making me happy this week, taken a few weeks to catch up here, but I'm finally settling down to watch the start of season 5 of The Expanse on Amazon Prime. And that is a show that I will recommend to anybody and everybody. Let me start by just telling you a little bit about my start with this kind of series, which really started with a series of books. The Expanse book series is written by James S.A. Corey, I think is the name, but the name is fake. It's actually 2 guys. And these two guys have put together a collaboration that churns out, and I mean just at an incredible clip, really excellent sci-fi. It's adventurous. It has the feel of hard sci-fi. It's really fun and really interesting to read. To give you a little bit of background about the story, it's a kind of near future where much of the solar system has been colonized. And the central conflict, especially in the early books, early seasons, is around a war, a kind of a 3-way war between Earth, which has evolved into this kind of one world government, and Mars, which is still a kind of a young planet full of colonists, has a very different society, and the asteroid belt, the organization of I think it's the OPA. I can't remember. It's like Free Planets Association, something like that. And the 2 things really stand out in this book series. One is the characters. There's a really excellent use of like interchanging the different characters as you go through the series. There's one central character named James Holden, who's this kind of adventurous starship captain type.
He's fine.
He's great. I love Holden.
He's the least interesting character in the entire thing.
Well, that's the thing, because what's really good about this series is it has a kind of Game of Thrones level like size to the cast of characters, and they're adding and changing which side characters are kind of are core parts of the story as you go from book to book. For example, in book 2, they introduce a character who they very smartly added from the very beginning of the television program, a woman named Avasarala, who is a little old Indian lady who is on the United Nations, in the UN, like way high up in the government.
Yeah, she's like a constantly underestimated power broker in the Earth government.
Yes,
Diplomat.
Yeah, she's so good. I mean, as good as they did with her in the show, she's incredible in the books. Like, really, really terrific characters in this show. And then the second thing that they do really well, I mean, there's lots of characters. I could continue to list excellent characters in this book. And Raygan is right. Most of them are not James Holden, who's just
He's
kind of the hub of a...
He's the
hub
character.
of a wheel.
He's a protagonist.
Yeah.
What do you want?
Yeah, he's got some layers.
He just really cares about his crew, man. Just really cares.
He really
about
does.
his crew.
He's the James T. Kirk of this show. And then what you have that is also incredible and is great in both the books and the show is a really good use of hard sci-fi science and technology. Like they have some kind of imagined future technology, and that does kind of get kind of out there the farther into the series that you get. But especially early in the series, the tech feels very grounded, and the way that they're flying, the timelines of things flying from one planet to another are compressed from what they might be with today's technology, but still, it takes a long ass time to get from Earth to Mars and things like that. So, and if you really like that tech stuff, the book is full of it. The book is full of like descriptions of how everything works and, who invented what and things like that. But, so I can't recommend this show enough. It is in its 5th season, which I believe will be its final season.
6th, I think, is the last.
Oh, they're going to get a 6th season? Excellent. Okay, here's the thing.
But they knew going into 5th.
Yeah, they're playing
the last,
that,
so it's planned.
That's good. And here's the thing. The show was originally on the Sci-Fi Channel. When the Sci-Fi Channel decided they weren't going to be making any more of it, I am led to understand that Jeff Bezos, who was a big fan of the show, was personally involved in moving it to Amazon Prime and funding it. And imagine what it must be like to be a billionaire and to be able to personally uncancel your favorite big budget sci-fi show.
I mean, that's a plot line that could happen on The Expanse.
Yeah.
Communism.
It really is.
I'm in the 3rd season right now.
Me too.
We have a policy that we only watch it at night on the projector because it looks gorgeous. And I think the funniest thing to us is, so the credits are absolutely spectacular, and they have the tiniest writing that we are squinting to read, like labeling everything on the map that we love watching at like 100 inches. And I'm like, what do normal people experience? Is it just like a fuzzy line? But
it's pretty tiny text. You're right about the intro. Like the intro is really cool. It has this reminds me of the Game of Thrones intro where they just sort of fly over that like fake map, except it's like planets from space and showing how things changed over time. There's like a shot in there of like sea level rise consuming the Statue of Liberty, or them having to raise the Statue of Liberty out of the ocean. It's stuff like that. It's really, really good. And yeah, no, can't recommend it enough. Well produced, great books. Keep at it.
Yeah, I like the books better than the show, but the show is so much more accessible because the books are there's a lot of those books. So I would definitely recommend checking out the show. And if you enjoy it, do check out the books. I think they're a little bit better. I had a weird itch recently. I don't think I've mentioned this on the show before.
You usually don't tell us about your like medical issues.
God damn it! I'm playing a game called Captain.
Get him, Shane.
I'm playing a game called Captain Tsubasa: Rise of the New Champions. This is an anime AF soccer game, not something that I'm usually into. Specifically soccer games, but here's how I came to this. First of all, Blaseball in 2020 made me think, maybe I don't hate sports. Maybe I just hate real sports. So that's ingredient number 1. And then
poor Nate.
And I also was hearing a lot of discourse about Pyre. Like we were talking a lot about Pyre on our Discord recently after Hades came out, and I was thinking, yeah, I really liked playing that too. And then I heard a little bit about Captain Tsubasa: Rise of the New Champions, which I'll explain in a little bit more detail in a second. It's basically just an anime AF soccer game, and I thought to myself, you know what? Maybe I would play a soccer game if it just didn't star real people and instead had anime AF people with giant hair and like super power moves. And that's exactly what this is. And I'm actually really, really enjoying it. I don't want to like sell it too strongly because it is still just basically a soccer game. But I'm having a lot of fun with it. Captain Tsubasa is an extremely long running manga, and there have been, I think, numerous anime series based on it over the years. And it's about this kid who is the world's greatest prodigy of soccer. I think they call him something like in the manga it calls him something like the heaven sent lord of soccer or something like that. It's extremely over the top, and his tagline is "The ball is my friend," and that's because back when he was a tiny child many years ago, he was playing soccer in the street and was and a car nearly hit, or actually did hit him. But because he was holding a soccer ball, the force of the car impact hit the soccer ball instead of him and bounced him out of the way, and he was completely unharmed. He landed on the soccer ball as well. And after that, when the soccer ball saved his life, he realized that the ball is his friend. And so he dedicated his life to being great at soccer. And this game takes place when he's in middle school, and he's already become the most talked about person in all of middle school soccer. And this game would lead you to believe that middle school soccer is the world's most important sport. Because we're talking about these middle school matches between regional middle schools in Japan all take place in these incredible arenas with literally thousands upon thousands of screaming fans and fluttering banners, and there are people on both sides whose absolute life is on the line in every single one of these middle school soccer tournaments. And it's just so over the top and silly and fun.
I have a question. Excuse me, Trent Krim, the Independent.
Nice.
Yes, Trent?
Is this little soccer kid gifted with any supernatural powers?
Well, apart from the ball being his friend, he has a number of special moves. It's actually kind of interesting in a game sense, in that you play as this whole team, right? It's a soccer game. You can take control of any of the players. But Tsubasa is so much better than anyone else that it's ridiculous. So that's a kind of a weird thing to see in a video game. The one of your players on your team is uniquely fantastic at the sport. But many of the players, not all of them, but many of them, Tsubasa included, do have these sort of special moves that verge on absurd, superpowers. And so, for example, one of them has a move. They all have a name. So one of them will have the flying tiger kick, and when you do it, the screen changes to this special animation where he does this weird flying kick, and a giant spectral tiger leaps out of the ground and appears behind him in frame. And if the goalie catches the ball, the ball is literally on fire and is spinning around like a little dynamo, and physics are defied.
All right.
It's like Rocket League.
It's
Raygan,
wild.
So Raygan, you started
Ted,
this,
yes, we'll do.
You started this off as saying, I really liked baseball. Maybe I do like sports, which is a mind-boggling connection to make. And then based off of everything you just said about why you like this game, I'm going to go ahead and say you still don't like sports.
No. You don't understand. Yes, I found I just like fake sports.
You like the narrative that can be formed around bonkers magic sports.
Yes.
Which is fine. And
Exactly.
I do too.
Yeah. And that's really what this works. So the way this is structured is kind of funny. It's it's telling a season of a super over the top shonen sports anime. And so it will have it, if you're playing the story mode, before each match, there's a lengthy story scene where it sets up who your team is and where they're at, who the other team is, who their key players are, what the emotional stakes are for that opposing team. And then when the match begins, at several points throughout the match, it will find moments to give you little additional bits of story. So I think it's watching for things okay, Tsubasa and this other main opposing player are near each other on the field. Let's take control away from the player and play a little scene. And you see it play out. And it may have some consequences. So, for example, there can be scripted goals that you cannot avoid the other team taking on you because it's part of the story, right? But I thought that was really interesting. This approach to storytelling, where it sticks story into your game, into the sports game in a way that's, I thought, pretty neat. So I'm enjoying it a lot. It's goofy. It's not great. It's kind of clunky in certain ways, but I'm liking it.
And if anyone didn't pick up on it, I was making references to Ted Lasso, which is the
rules.
Yes. If you were choosing one soccer-based piece of fiction, I would encourage you to find Ted Lasso this year. But I don't know. Raygan can
start with Ted Lasso, then go to Raygan's game. I'll say for me this week, so we covered the game a couple weeks ago, Hades, and I didn't get too much into it on the episode, but as much as everyone has loved the writing and the sort of interplay between the characters, that part of the game had not really been the part that I enjoyed. I've been way more into just the actual functional gameplay. I really enjoyed it from that level, and I didn't really care too much about the writing, even though I acknowledge that it is fantastic. That said, since we recorded that episode, I had only I had cleared it one time when we recorded that episode. The story between your first clear and what happens after you make more and more clears, avoiding spoilers here, I actually have come to really enjoy the story and where it's going. So, because of the nature of this show, we only have small windows to play it. So I think I just want to add that now that I've actually defeated Hades multiple times, the story element of it has really picked up for me, and I've been really, really enjoying it as I get deeper and deeper into that element of the game. That said, this is a continuation, as Raygan said, of our conversation from the Discord. I still think Pyre is my favorite Supergiant game, but I have come to enjoy the story of Hades way more than I did before getting my first clear. So if you're out there and you're still playing this game and you haven't cleared it yet and you're wondering why people like the story as much as they do, that's kind of how I was feeling, and I have come around more now that I have gotten much further than I was before.
Awesome.
So that's my thing that's making me happy. That's what I've been playing in between killing all of my animals on Animal Farm. I'm still getting through Hades.
So we have friends in Seattle, because we used to live there, who do movie nights once a month. And it's a little bit wild to do a movie night with someone who is 3 hours times difference from you. But it's exceptionally well done. They did like a white elephant type thing where everyone drew a random number. And then that corresponded to one of 50 Christmas movies. And if you won a trivia competition that someone had written, your winner would win. And the person who won was the champion for a movie called 8 Women, or Huit Femme, if you speak French, because it's a French movie. Never heard of it, but strap in, because this movie is really weird. It's a French, lightly Christmassy murder mystery, and it's a musical, and there might be some light lesbian in it. It's just a 1950, it's so light and frothy that it would blow away in a second. The costumes are incredible. Everything is super hypersaturated.
Out of all the adjectives, you qualified as light both its Christmassiness and its lesbianism.
Oh, yeah, it is. Both were light. It was one of the best experiences I've had of communally watching in a chat of a movie, because people were judging the musical numbers. People were just reveling in the wallpaper and the costumes. And then suddenly a weird plot turn would happen. Everyone would go, why did they hit that old woman in a wheelchair with a vase? Why?
Now you got me. Now I'm in. That sounds great.
And then she stands up and she's not in the wheelchair. Everything weird in this movie happens. Why is it a musical? It was directed, the choreography is high school level, but that kind of makes it more charming. It is a movie that I immediately went to all of my friends who watch bad movies and was like, this is one you definitely haven't seen. And it is not bad and it's not good, but it is inexplicable and it is charming. So I don't know if I'm recommending this movie, but if you are trying to do something that feels, it's that cozy murder mystery of who killed the dad. And then by the end of it, you're just, if he was inspired by 8.5, because each woman gets a song about how she feels. It's so weird, guys.
I love a good bad movie. That's one of my favorite things, is to watch a good bad movie.
And you never get a good bad movie that is also so beautiful to look at just the entire time. All of these women they've I think almost all of them have won like Best Actress award at Cannes. So it's as if like Nicole Kidman and Reese Witherspoon and all these people just did a weird murder mystery musical for no reason. Like that's what
awesome.
this feels like. Highly recommend it. And I also really recommend, if you haven't in this quarantine season just done a Discord chat with people while watching a movie, especially with people who you don't know their partners very well. Like almost any movie becomes memeable. You will find out this quarantine season.
I'm surprised
really
we haven't
fun.
done that as a group. We should pick a movie and do that sometime.
Yeah, I'm
Maybe with
doing
our
a
Discord
Bridgerton watch
patrons.
party on December 26th, and we all are making paper fans, and we all are like a bottle of booze that we're going to drink through most of Bridgerton. So I watch along sound sad, but they're really fun if your friends are funny.
That sounds like a blast. Well, listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of The Short Game. You can find our show on the internet at www.theshortgame.net, where you'll find a contact form. You can let us know what games you think or you're interested in. You can find our Twitter at _shortgame. And you can also find us on Patreon. The show is supported by our beloved patrons. And every patron, $1 a month or up, gets immediate access to our Discord, which is where we talk about the show. We talk about games that we're playing. We plan things out there. We are in Game of the Year season. We're working on our Game of the Year coverage right now, and we should be releasing that probably next episode, next week. So come back for that. We're looking forward to that. And if you want to talk about your Games of the Year, our Discord is a great place to do that. We're going to be opening up a channel for that right now. So join us there, patreon.com/theshortgame. Of course, you can also support the show by letting other people know about it. This is a great time of year to let people know, hey, if you're interested in the kinds of games that I like, this podcast has a Game of the Year episode. You could forward them that, or you could let them know to check out our website. So here's all the stuff that we played over the year. So help us support the show by helping us grow the show. We really appreciate that kind of thing as well. And of course, you can find me on the internet on Twitter at Raygan K. That's RayGanK. Laura, where can people find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Laura J. Nash.
Nate, where can people find you?
On Twitter at Nate STL.
And Shane, where can people find you?
On Twitter at 8BitShane.
And once again, listeners, thank you for joining us on this episode of The Short Game.